are listening to The Thought Leaders Show with the world's cutting-edge, hottest innovators, influencers, and impact makers today. If you are looking for inspiration and motivation, listen in. Welcome to The Thought Leaders Show. Now, here's your host.
Hi, this is Tammy Patzer, and I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, Karen Byrnes Allen. Karen is an integrative health practitioner, educator, author, and nationally awarded thought leader with 25 years of experience. Her most recent work has been in the area of languaging the extraordinary. She joins us today to talk about that. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Tammy. I'm glad to be here with you.
I find this a very intriguing topic. So tell me more. How did you get interested in the languaging of the extraordinary?
Well, Tammy, I've been a healthcare practitioner for 25 years, and I work in the area of integrative health, alternative medicine, where people who haven't found good solutions with the drugs and surgery of conventional care keep looking. And often by the time that people come to see me, they are quite desperate. And I have been listening to those people's subjective experience for 25 years. So one of the things that happens not uncommonly is someone comes in, for example, with severe pain. Maybe they've got severe neuralgia of some kind, sciatica, or severe head pain or back pain, or something in their gut or on their skin. And their subjective experience of it is intense and relentless. And they've been through all the tests. They've worked with, docs from GPs to specialists. And in the end, they have no diagnosis. Their doc is frustrated saying, if there was anything that I could see that was wrong with you, I would help you fix it. But all your labs are normal. All the scans are normal. I've got nothing to work with here. And in a situation with the diagnosis where the doctor says, we can't find anything wrong with you, there are some quite specific messages that come across to the client in that. Oh, it's all in your head. You're making this up. Or they get told this is clearly a psychosomatic illness, which usually gets interpreted to, this person thinks I'm doing this to myself. I have brought this on myself. And those kinds of messages where people are trying to describe an extraordinary experience of pain with no physical evidence are ones that take language beyond average. Pain comes in so many different flavors. This is why we are now in the midst of this enormous opioid epidemic, because pain is something that is so personal. We don't have an external measurement of it. People can say it's low, medium, and high, but to actually describe the nature of it, well, it feels like if you took a hot knitting needle and stuck it through my ear and down my neck, and it vibrated a little bit on the left side. These are incredibly individualized experiences of pain that people are trying to describe. Another thing that I've heard, not uncommonly in my office, is experience of people talking about near death and something where they saw something or felt something quite extraordinary and quite beyond normal human experience. And for any of these people, trying to help them find words, linear words that we use to describe the ordinary, things like a shoe or a drawer or a plant. These apply to things that are outside of us, but not so much to these subjective experiences inside us. So I had a background of looking at how do we describe symptoms? How do we describe unusual symptoms in my work with clients? And then 6 years ago in 2013, I began to work with a quite extraordinary healer, Mahendra Trivedi, who is the originator of a particularly potent form of biofield work called the Trivedi effect. And the Trivedi effect at its core is a transmission of energy from one individual to a target. This falls within the National Institutes of Health's recognized definition of distance healing by intention. And it's your listeners may have heard of Reiki or Qigong or therapeutic touch or laying on of hands by someone like John of God. And all of those are examples of the healing of one person as it impacts another person. One of the things that's quite unique about Mahendra Trivedi is that his work goes beyond the healing of symptoms within an individual person into lab research that shows the effects of this transmitted energy in plants, in animals, in minerals. And Mr. Trivedi has over 4,000 research studies that have documented the effects of this energy. During my work with him, I developed my own capacity with his assistance and direction as a conduit of energy. And I completed my own research that had to do with vitamin D3 and a cell medium, basically the soup that little cells sit in a petri dish that give them all of the nourishment and the nutrients that they need in order to function. In this research project, I, using this Trivedi effect approach, imbued the vitamin D3 and the cell medium with energy. And then the vitamin D3 and cell medium were put in a little petri dish with some bone cells that are called osteoblasts. And there were control bone cells in a cell medium with vitamin D3 that had not been imbued with this energy. And then there were the experimental osteoblasts, the bone cells. And there were controls that allowed us to see what's the ordinary function of a bone cell versus the ones in this research experience. And the results that came out of this showed that there was a 116% increase in alkaline phosphatase, which is an enzyme that collects around a bone to encourage calcium and phosphorus, all of the minerals that are needed to make a bone to come into that area. And the second thing that you need to make bones is collagen. Collagen is a supple, webby material that is extruded by a bone cell to allow a structural frame that the minerals can come and sit on, and they can deposit into the collagen to then make healthy, dense bone. In this particular petri dish with the imbued energy, there was a 190% increase in collagen. And then it also showed a 154% increase in bone mineralization. Now, these were measurable results in lab conditions. This is an experiment that has been repeated by 44 different practitioners who are working with Mr. Trivedi. And it has profound implications for people with osteoporosis. It's a scalable treatment. It's something that doesn't have the potential side effects of various kinds of medications that are trying to help with osteoporosis. And this is hugely important because we have this big epidemic of osteoporosis in an aging population. So that's how I got interested in, golly, how do we talk about this stuff?
Well, it's really interesting, and just going to go back, but you mentioned the National Institutes of Health, and they actually have recognized distance healing by intention. And I think that's really important because, again, National Institutes of Health is one of the premier organizations in the United States related to our health. And they've actually recognized that distance healing by intention is real. And then Mr. Trivetti, of course, with the 4,000 experiments, and then you have participated in the experiments under these conditions, laboratory conditions, and all of this has all been repeated, and it's scalable. So right there, it makes you open your eyes and your ears to listen to see what more can happen with this. I mean, it's just phenomenally extraordinary. So how are you making people aware of all of these results?
Well, that's a good question, because when you have something like this that's quite extraordinary, you want to disseminate this information. You want to open people's eyes to the potential. So initially, the results of these experiments have been published in peer-reviewed journals. And actually, this is for the science community because they're really geeky and they're not anything that the average person is going to go seek out and read. So that's like the first tier of dissemination of knowledge. This is something that says this was the exact experiment that we did in an FDA-approved lab under extremely strict conditions. And this is the way that we know the outcomes were exactly what they said. So that was the first thing. And then the next thing, based on those publications, the standard way that a new healthcare innovation is distributed is by going to conferences. And so that was my next step. And last year in 2018, I presented these research results along with information about osteoporosis at several conferences. By 2025 in the US, there is a prediction by the US Panel on Aging that there will be 3 million people with serious fractures because of osteoporosis, with an annual direct medical cost of $25 billion. Approximately 50%, half of all women over 50 will have osteoporosis. And according to the AARP, the implications of a hip fracture in an older woman, 10 to 20% will die within a year. And 40% of those women who fracture a hip will never gain their prior independence. So the upside of something that has this kind of potential to improve bone density and remediate osteoporosis, this is pretty darn exciting stuff. So I presented this at various conferences. The first one was a complementary and alternative medicine conference. The next one was a conference on spirituality and healing. And the third one was a conference on consciousness and the material implications of consciousness. And I have to say, Tammy, the response that I got from the audience was unlike anything I have ever experienced. As a practitioner with 25 years of experience, I do a lot of teaching. I do a lot of teaching around the world. And I've made lots and lots of conference presentations in a wide variety of settings, wide variety of audiences. And almost always, the response is one of curiosity and interest, and people come up to me afterwards. People ask questions. They want a business card. We talk about opportunities for collaboration. It's quite a welcoming and interesting thing. I have quite an inclusive and interesting and engaging style of interaction. Until I started teaching about this. And my experience was that I gave my presentation, and at the beginning, I talked about osteoporosis and the limitations of conventional care and the costs of the epidemic and what do we want to do about this. And then I presented a little bit of information about biofield and about the Trivedi effect. And then I presented the results. And as soon as we got into biofield, oh, this is energy, oh, this is different, I could begin to feel the room get uncomfortable. And then soon I could see on people's faces this kind of stunned look. Now, the first conference, my presentation was actually being filmed. And I thought perhaps that the discomfort of the audience was because there were cameras and there were lights and there were reflectors, and maybe they didn't want to say something because they weren't sure if it was going to be on film. And I thought, okay, maybe that was why, because I got to the end of my talk. Any questions? Nobody raised their hand. Nobody said a word. And after I finished my presentation and I went back to my seat at the table where I had been sitting in the presentation hall, the people at the table moved away. And I thought, holy moly, this is a very different experience for me. And at first I thought, wow, these are CAM practitioners. These are people who understand subtle energy. That's kind of strange. And so for my next presentation at a spirituality and healing venue, I thought, all right, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. These are people who are into God. They're into God energy. Instead of talking about this in terms of physics, I'm going to talk about this the way that Mr. Trivedi talks about it, as divine energy. We become a conduit for divine energy. And the response, oddly, was identical. Uncomfortable audience, stunned, silence after my presentation, no questions. People who were sitting by me found an excuse to go sit elsewhere. And then I thought, wow, okay, this is really a unique experience that I'm having. And the third conference was the same. Excuse me, where I was talking about this in terms of consciousness. What happens when you clarify your consciousness to a point where you can be a conduit of energy in a way that we know and recognize with Qigong, in a way that we know and recognize with spiritual masters? What happens when we can do this and get these kinds of physical results? And again, the audience had this stunned, uncomfortable response. And for me, it brought up this huge question of how do I communicate something that is extraordinary? Because clearly the words that I was using were not working well. This was a unique experience from my entire professional career.
I'm listening to you, and I'm, the part that is so amazing to me as I listen to you describe it is the 3 different conferences. And for example, the first one, you kind of would say, well, it's a little more, academic and more sciencey. But then when you're talking about spirituality and healing and consciousness, I'm a little astounded, and I can imagine, I can just imagine you, though, when you go back to your table and all the
people move. Right,
like,
exactly.
and
it was like, Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore.
I think that is so amazing because it says more, and I think that it obviously, the divine was obviously pointing to you and saying, okay, Karen, we've got a problem with communication, that people are not ready to use ordinary words, I guess, with extraordinary. But how weird is it? And weird isn't even an appropriate word. It's strange that people who are there, like, for example, spirituality and healing, you would think that they would be listening to you and really tuning in to that. And when you got to the results, that saying, hey, this divine energy can be harnessed for good, for healing, not only of humans, but it works with plants and animals and inanimate objects, that they would be people who would have that curiosity and that. But it is just amazing to me, since you had evidence, you had clear proof of these amazing results, yet it was so hard for people to hear and comprehend. So now you're on a mission. So how do we communicate something so extraordinary that the words that we have now are not enough? How do you do that?
But that exactly has become my mission. How do we bridge from the ordinary into the extraordinary? So my first stop was to work with the Library of Writings of Dr. George Lakoff, who is a cognitive neuroscientist from Berkeley. Some of your listeners may be familiar with him. He has a podcast called Frame Lab, and he has written a whole series of books. Probably the most widely known one is called Don't Think of an Elephant. And in there, he talks about the concept of frames. And basically what he says is that 30 years ago, everything we thought we knew about how people think was wrong. And we do not think with our logical, critical reasoning neocortex. We actually think through a structure that he calls frames. And I'll give you an example of a frame. Let's imagine a little baby who is watching mom pour water into glasses. Every night at dinner, the baby's sitting there in the baby chair, and mom comes in from the pitcher. She pours water into the water glasses, and the baby sees the water go in and the water level rise up to the top of the glass. This is why in every culture we have a way of saying, fill this up. Nobody ever says, fill this down or fill this across. We fill it up because the water level goes up. There is a biological experience associated with the idea of up. The baby's on the floor and puts the arms up to say, Mama, up, up, up. There's an idea built into our biology of up. No matter what the word of up is in any language, it has these frames for context. Now, there are hundreds of frames that we have that allow us to grasp a particular idea. There are frames for family, for work, for various kinds of emotions, for all the physical things that we see happening out in the world. And if there is no frame, then it is extremely difficult for the brain to take it in. There is an experience where there is no scaffolding to climb on. We were talking earlier about how bones get built. Bones get built by having a little bone cell that extrudes collagen. And collagen is a bendy, stretchy, quite wonderful material that extends out in a web. And then the alkaline phosphatase is an enzyme that goes and hangs all around the collagen and says to the calcium and magnesium and phosphorus, all of the minerals that are needed to build bones, hey, come over here, come over here. It has a chemical signal that invites all of those chemicals to come. And then those minerals deposit themselves in the collagen. Now, we could imagine a frame being sort of like the virtual collagen in our head. And if we don't have any collagen there for the minerals, the new ideas to stick to, then they don't stick anywhere. And people are not able to grasp the idea. Now, frames are not something that you instantly invent, but memes that go around on the internet, social customs, those are all examples of frames. And a lot of these are built up through exposure after exposure after exposure. A lot of our racial prejudices are examples of frames. A lot of our societal viewpoints of what is morally right or wrong are frames. And those frames might be dependent on where we grew up. If we grew up in a rural area of a South American culture or in a rural area in India, it would not be a problem at all to bribe a policeman because that's how business is done. There's no pejorative moral dilemma here. That's just how the culture works. Whereas if those folks were to come to the US and try to hand a policeman, some amount of money with their driver's license when they had been pulled over, that would not work. Hopefully it would not work. Because the frame here is different. The cultural expectation is different. And if there's no frame, then there's no ability to grasp that idea. There's another researcher whose work I've been looking at as I've been digging into this languaging of the extraordinary, along with George Lakoff's work. Her name is Catherine Schultz, and she is a New York Times writer. She has a book that she wrote called Being Wrong, Adventures in the Margin of Error, that's very interesting reading. And she gave a TED Talk about this that's been viewed over 4 million times. One of the things that she says in the TED Talk is that when we look at someone with a different opinion than us, for example, this could be me saying, I see biofield as an incredible, superior innovation that can save people pain and suffering. I see it as a huge, reliable opportunity to improve health. Whereas somebody else may see it as, that is the wackiest thing I have ever heard. Now, what happens when people have these different opinions? Catherine Schultz says that each person assigns the other one as wrong. And what do we think when someone else has a different opinion and we think they're wrong? At first we think, well, they're just uninformed. Clearly, if they had the same facts that I had, they would come to the same conclusion that I do. If someone had the same facts about biofield, if I told them the numbers for the research, if I explained the basic traditions thousands of years long that had to do with energy transmission, of course they would come to the same conclusion that I came to. And yet that doesn't happen. So if someone isn't uninformed, if they've been given the facts and they don't come to the same conclusion, then Catherine Schultz says often our second position on it is, well, the person's just stupid. They've got the facts. They are choosing not to use them. They're just stupid. And yet we might have a friend or a colleague who looks at the same facts as us and comes to a different conclusion. And we happen to know that that person is quite well educated, quite intelligent, quite capable of a quality thought process. So they're not uninformed, and clearly they're not stupid. Then what's the next conclusion that we draw? The person is evil. They are malintentioned, or they are deliberately being obtuse or problematic in some way. And she says, in reality, none of those things are true. Different people look at the same data and draw different conclusions because the frames they are working with are different, or because the frames that are present in this person are not present in that person. And this is what all of George Lakoff's work shows. So the idea of how do we communicate something extraordinary is going to be dependent on the frames that we can use. And my conclusion is that in the presentations that I gave, the frames I used did not work. And that's why the audience sat there stunned. That's why they didn't ask any questions. And that's why they moved away from my table when I went to sit back down.
I'm chuckling over that, but the last part about where the people moved away from you. But I'm thinking about that because I know as you're talking about this framing aspect about what we think of someone, about when they think differently than we do when we have the same facts presented to us. I see it. It plays out very well on social media, on Facebook, and I'm sitting here judging myself because I've been judged also, because whenever I've had an opinion about something, I've been told I was uninformed, I've been called stupid, and
Yes.
I myself, I don't know that anyone's ever said I was evil, but I have often thought someone was just plain evil because of their opinion on something. And I do understand the concept of frames is interesting because the truth is human beings are always trying to make sense of their world. And so they have to have something that to help them make sense. And again, like you described, we all have different frames. So are there any frames for the extraordinary experiences? Have you determined anything? Have you gone back and used a frame that you didn't get that response yet, or are you still in the research phase?
Well, at this point, this is my current line of research, and perhaps in a few months we can have an interview and I can give you an update, because I'm traveling to Europe and to the UK for a series of presentations using my theoretical, my hypothesis of these new frames. And I'll, film at 11. I'll find out if it's any different. What I've been trying to do is identify the language that people who have extraordinary experiences use when they talk about them. And in large part, this language is defensive, because many people have been ridiculed or openly scoffed at or told that their experience was not viable. Now, where part of, I'm a healthcare practitioner, and so part of my interest in this, I am working on a book that's called Talking Your Walk, The Placebo and Nocebo Effect of Languaging the Extraordinary. When someone has an intense experience that may be the most important experience they have ever had in their life, this could be a near-death experience for someone who's in hospice, or it could be a subjective experience of pain for a woman who had a baby, and 6 months later, she's still having severe labor pains, even without any physical findings. How do we help those people who have these extraordinary experiences talk effectively with the practitioners that are around them? What are the conversations that should be able to happen in a doctor's office or in a clinic or in a hospital or in a public health setting? One of the other people that I'm working with is very involved in the work of Susan Scott. She's another author who wrote a book called Fierce Conversations. And in her book, and she has a whole website, which I would encourage your readers to go find out about, Susan Scott Fierce. I think she has the Fierce blog or Fierce something. She's easy to find online. And part of what I'm investigating and trying out a conversation at a time is the capacity to have a fierce, honest, real conversation about extraordinary events with people who otherwise would likely have thought me to be uninformed, stupid, or evil, or I might have thought them to be uninformed, stupid, or unkind, poorly intended. And as we try out these different methods of conversation, what is it that allows us to build a firm bridge from the land of ordinary into the experience of extraordinary and allows traffic to go both ways? When someone has what is possibly the most important experience of their whole life, and they are scoffed at when they share it, or they are told this isn't real, it's a hallucination, or they're told this is impossible. And this happens to people who don't find a good solution within conventional medicine, and maybe they go outside of conventional medicine to a Qigong practitioner or a naturopath or a hands-on healer or a homeopath. And they do something that is considered to be not reputable within conventional medicine. And they find a solution and their condition is healed. Their pain is gone. The tumor disappears. And they go back to their doctor and they say, this phenomenal, extraordinary thing has happened to me. I am healed. And their doctor says, well, how did this happen? And they say, I went to see this alternative practitioner. And many times these clients get very intense negative feedback from their physician. You shouldn't be doing that. You are endangering your health by going to these disreputable people who don't really understand medicine. And the client says, but you didn't have a solution. You told me there was no answer to this. And I went and found an answer and it healed me. And the practitioner cannot hear it because it challenges the entire belief system of the person. And in that case, the negative messages that the client gets have a nocebo effect, a negative placebo, which can cause things like relapses. And on the other hand, if that person can go in and see a practitioner, their primary care doc, who is open-minded and says, wow, you went to see a Qigong practitioner who transmitted energy to you, and now this enormous polyp in your nose is completely gone. And I'm looking here at the MRI scan that shows that it's gone. Wow, that's amazing. That then gives the client the affirmation that they found a solution, that they are coming back now showing, I did this and I was healed. You know, one of the things that I hear most often from my clients is, I wish my doc had more training in alternatives because the medicines aren't working for me. And I really would like to go to my doc and get the kind of care I'm getting from you. You're not a physician. I'd like to be able to get this from my doctor, but my doctor doesn't know this stuff, doesn't do this stuff with me. And this is what's healing me. So if we look at what would be the incredible outcome of my research, of this writing project, of all of this work around languaging the extraordinary, it would be one where everyone who was sick, who was suffering, or who had experienced something so important in their life that the dearest dream of their heart would be able to share this with the people that are important to them, the people that are close to them. What if there were a bridge that let us traverse between the people we care about, the people who are supposed to be caring for us, and these extraordinary experiences? I think that's one of the most important questions that I can be trying to answer.
Well, I think you're right. And what a mission that you're on to identify the language that you can use to discuss the extraordinary. And I'm sure our listeners would love to find out more about you. How can they do that?
My website is www.talkingyourwalk.com, and you can learn there more about my speaking and writing and podcasts and the research that I'm doing. We usually talk about walking your talk, but in this case, there are so many people who aren't talking their walk, and a good outcome would be if everybody could be talking your walk. Thank you so much for having me on today, Tammy.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen. It's so eye-opening that when you get into this higher level, you're talking about academics and you're talking about highly educated people, and how closed-minded some people are, even though they're very educated. And you would think, I was always taught that being educated, or why I should want to have more education, was so that I could learn how to think for myself, and so that I could be more open-minded to the world. And so I just find this whole topic just really interesting, about language and how do we discuss these experiences. And just like you said, these extraordinary experiences are maybe the most important things that have ever happened to us in our lives, and yet we don't feel empowered to talk about them. So I think the work that you're doing is definitely extraordinary and important, to help the entire world to come to understand that there is so much more to our lives, that in the subjective, than in what we can necessarily say in ordinary language. So I'm really looking forward to get that feedback when you come back after your European tour, to find out, how the people responded.
Right. Do people still move away from my table in the conference?
And the framing and what you discover, because that's just very phenomenal information. So it's talkingyourwalk.com. Karen has a website. She has a podcast. She's writing a book. And I definitely think that, I'm like on, I want to be part of watching this and helping to help you to bring this out into the open. So I'm really thankful that we're doing our interviews about this. So thank you so much, Karen. And everyone, again, it's Karen Byrnes Allen, talkingyourwalk.com. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thanks, Tammy.
Everyone, this is Tammy Patzer. Go make it a beautiful day.
You've been listening to the Thought Leaders Show. To get all past shows and to get all future shows, go to thoughtleadersshow.com.